Welcome back to this week's episode of the State of Recruiting. Second episode this week after our bonus content dropped yesterday. We are back once again. Hudson, I know you're a big softball guy, and we're just watching some Texas softball. And you said before the show you had some takes to get off. So instead of asking you how you're doing, I'm going to ask you to get these takes off about softball.
Absolutely. First off, Mike, I appreciate you coming back and recording another episode of the State of Recruiting with me after 100+ minutes of talking about expectations and putting you on the spot yesterday. That was a lot of fun. Try to do more of that type of stuff going forward. I know the early response has been pretty good. So Texas softball, for those who are listening Friday or Saturday, Texas softball just got done beating UCLA 7-2 in the opening game of the Women's College World Series. And I genuinely think this is one of the better overall turnarounds for Texas athletics like any program. Earlier this year, Texas softball was kind of being buried by the media and also just me. It just looked like a team that didn't have any sort of higher aspirations other than just kind of getting through the year and retooling and, kind of reloading with a really good group of true freshmen. And somehow along the way, Mike White was able to get the women on this team to really gel, and what has resulted in the largest run total Texas ever has had at the Women's College World Series. That goes back to the really good Kat Osterman, Blair Leona teams. They put up 7 in, I think 4 or 5 innings against a UCLA team that's dominated by pitching. True freshman Mia Scott from Angleton, Texas, went 4 for 4, having all 4 of her hits on just 4 pitches that she took. And that is kind of the core, along with Sophia Simpson, Katie Simmons. All of these Texas softball players are just kind of leveling up at the right time. And you have 2 All-Americans that are seniors in Janae Jefferson at second and Haley Dulcini in the circle, to where I'm kind of starting to think that, everybody knows that number 1 Oklahoma is the team to beat. They're a heavy favorite. I genuinely, Mike, I don't know if you know this. I haven't been able to find much odds. Normally you'll find odds for Women's College World Series. The bookmakers are kind of like, okay, Oklahoma's, 54-2 or whatever. We're not just going to let you make money on Oklahoma this Women's College World Series. But Texas did beat Oklahoma 1 out of 3 games earlier this year. I genuinely think there is a chance, if they keep Dulcini's pitch count low and they find a way to just stay in those games like they did with the 3rd game in Austin where they, beat Oklahoma for the first time this year. I don't know. It's starting to feel like a little team of destiny-ish. And even if they don't climb the Sooners mountain twice in a double elimination style format, it's still one of the better Texas softball seasons I can remember, just with how, as an unseeded team, they were able to go and win a game at the Women's College World Series, beat number 4 Arkansas on the road in the Supers, go to a really tough Seattle regional and get out of there. Just fantastic stuff. And, I just wanted to give Texas softball, I think, their much-deserved flowers.
Heck yeah, that was our new segment, Talking Softball. But yes, for sure, let's give those ladies their due. They've certainly earned it. So,
So understandable for those who hit that 15-second skip button a couple times. No worries, gents and ladies.
Yeah, for sure. We'll get into the main course of today. And it's kind of just, hey, it's summertime, it's visit time. And
it's about to get crazy. It's June, baby.
We're getting ready to roll. And so it's a terrifying kind of time for us because, this is the point of the year where things just start happening. Yeah. Timelines go crazy. Kids make decisions quicker than you expected them to or out of nowhere. And we're always on alert. You feel like an anvil is going to drop on your head at any moment. Let's just we'll first set up talking about kind of the big weekends Texas is expecting. They've got basically 2 big weekends this summer, and then they've got one where certainly some big names, but not maybe as big numbers-wise. So that first weekend will be next weekend, right? June 11th?
Yeah.
And the big name to know there is Florida running back Cedric Baxter. We've talked a lot about how Texas is rounding into pretty good form with Baxter. There's a lot of confidence there. I think Tashard Choice has done a great job. So it'll be big getting him back on campus. He'll be joined also by modern-day tight end Spencer Shannon, who, with Lafayette Kayaway off the board, I think Shannon becomes, one of your priority targets at the tight end position. Hudson, I mean, I've seen him a little bit, but I know you're a big fan of Shannon just based off what you've seen. What do you like about him?
Yeah, so Mike, when we first met Spencer Shannon outside of the spring game, I mean, it's hard not to look at the way that he's just built at a true 6'7", 240, and kind of then the gears start turning in your head. Went back, watched his film. Obviously, you always want to watch the huddle. That's kind of the baseline. But what I like to do, and you know this, and a lot of people that listen to us know this, but I like to go and actually watch like the game film as well. And what I saw with Spencer Shannon was just a really, really complete tight end that has a ton of room to grow as well. I love this evaluation. I think I wrote about it immediately. Even in the Heat Check article, when we kept on starting to get tight end offers, and we started to hear a little bit about Lafayette and maybe not being as much of a Texas lock. And, Texas was throwing out tight end offers all the time. So you kind of put the pieces together. It really started to feel like, okay, Spencer Shannon might be the first take in this class for Texas because, like we've talked about before, Mike, Spencer's already had 2 of his major visits out of the way to UCLA and Washington. So Texas kind of is getting the last official before he decides. It sets up really well for Texas, and it allows the timeline to where if you do miss out on him, you still have Will Randall. You still can then really push after Strake Jesuits, Chico Holt. You have a lot of options at tight end. So you go from a little bit of an unclear picture to now a very regimented, I guess, flow chart at the decision. Well, if Spencer Shannon does this, we'll go here. If he says yes, then it's kind of all aboard, Will Randall and trying to make sure that he and Arch Manning are locked in together as takes.
I think also you got to include Deuce Robinson's name in there a little bit as we've been talking. But I think Deuce Robinson's the kind of guy that, like, look, if we get Spencer Shannon, if we get Will Randall, if Deuce Robinson also wants in, we'll figure that spot out.
And that's the awesome thing about there not being the, limits anymore, Mike.
Mm-hmm.
Now you really can, to borrow a term we always kind of used to tease Stan Drayton, but you kind of can elephant hunt at the end of the cycle and just say, you know what, who cares? We are going to go after a national guy. Who cares that we have 2 tight ends already committed in the class? If per se, Arch Manning is in the boat, let's try to ride that wave and elevate the floor of the class. Absolutely.
I also think there's a chance. I've teased it a little bit. I think Hawaii linebacker Leona Lafall could be in that weekend. He's told me that it'll be mid-June, or my best intelligence talking to people near him, even though he hasn't announced it or scheduled it, is it would be that weekend if it's going to come. So, we'll kind of, and I think I'm trying to remember if it's him or somebody else looking at his visit schedule. That's the weekend that would make sense. So getting him, obviously 3 big out-of-state visitors, not a big in-state weekend. And that's kind of something we saw last year where they went with like, okay, we're going to spend one of these weekends on mainly out-of-state guys and like really throw our effort behind that.
Another one that I probably should have mentioned immediately too, Mike, is Tassili Akana is going to be in kind of that weekend. So he's doing a hectic kind of whirlwind college tour that finishes at Texas, I believe, on the 8th. Mm-hmm. So he almost, and I wouldn't be surprised if that turned into maybe a multiple day trip, considering kind of the family stuff there. Or even if it's not, you still have him as an almost appetizer to that visit weekend.
Yeah, and with Tassili and talking to his dad, and I know they've got a pretty tight schedule, so I don't know if it would turn into multi-day. But talking to his dad, I mean, I think this is where you lay the groundwork to get Tassili back on campus for an official, maybe later in the summer, maybe in the fall, and really try there. I think that Texas, obviously their chances have gone up, landing his sister for the volleyball team in the transfer portal. And Tassili and Leona are very well linked. They both played at Kahuku High School in Hawaii together, and before Tassili moved to Utah. And so I think that would one could beget the other, so to speak. The next weekend, while not like the biggest weekend numbers wise, I mean, is probably it's the weekend everybody will be tuned in for. By the way, we will have a great deal running on the website that weekend and the week leading up to it. So why will we have that deal? Because that is the Arch Manning weekend, the long anticipated Arch Manning official visit. What do we anticipate as of now to be his final official visit, along with some other big name guys in this class. But I mean, make no mistake, that weekend is all about number one.
Yeah, Mike, it's kind of surreal that we've even gotten to the point to where we're a couple weeks away from Arch Manning's official visit, the true kind of wind down of this recruiting process. We have started to get the text from people that, you kind of don't talk to that much. They're like, hey, I heard Arch Manning's going to take a visit. And I only imagine those to ramp up. And I've even heard from friends that follow recruiting and are kind of the recruiting guy in their own friend groups that they're starting to get these texts. They're like, hey, so this Manning kid's coming to Texas for a visit.
My grandmother mentioned it to my dad that she saw something on the internet about Arch Manning visiting Texas, and wondered if I knew anything about it. And my dad was like, well, you know how Michael's been flying back and forth to New Orleans a lot? That's kind of what's going on. Sorry, that's a rare Michael for me. That's what the family calls me. So, so yeah, I mean, it's all about that weekend. Will Randall will be in on the trip. I believe Mikhail Harrison Pilot will be in that weekend.
Which I reported earlier this week, which is a pretty big one.
Yeah, I mean, that's not to take away from any of those other names. I mean, I think maybe when you look at the safety picture, Mikhail Harrison Pilot is becoming a more important factor. Either
weird with his preference to play receiver though now, and it's maybe a balance of long-term versus short-term recruiting. Also, I mean, another big one, Mike, and we kind of reported this when we were out in Houston, but getting Jaquez Petaway the same week that Arch Manning is visiting is major. That's huge. Really good stuff from the Texas staff there. And, I think that it's also, if you're kind of reading into it a little bit, maybe smart for Arch Manning to say, okay, well, Jonte Cook's on his own timeline. Like, let me talk to some other big-time recruits at the receiver position in the state of Texas and, kind of get in there as well. So overall, just really well done setting that weekend. I think it's the perfect amount of kids on campus to where it still feels like a legit visit weekend, but also you're not running the risk of, for lack of a better term, the Fifis getting hurt because Arch Manning is demanding a lot more attention than, a lower 3-star defensive tackle or whatever.
And the way you say, I know you don't mean it like this. I'm going to make a slight correction to you there because I don't want it to come back on Arch. Doesn't really demand attention. It's I think the staffs feel like they have to get. It's not like Arch is like, I need this type of attention.
Thing. Like it's nothing. Yeah, exactly. I mean, Arch is the probably least demanding attention. Everything you hear about him is just that he's a normal dude, but less about him, more about the fact that the number one player in the country is on campus.
Yeah, anytime you're hosting a 5-star, the number one quarterback, let alone the number one overall prospect, it's going to be huge. Before we move on to that next weekend, do you want to give us anything on Hunter Osborne from your recent conversations with him, other than the fact that he's visiting?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Texas has grown from, man, this is really cool that I got this offer, really late in my process. For those who didn't know, Texas offered Hunter Osborne 10 days before he was scheduled to release a top schools list. He decided to keep that top schools list and just add Texas. So he made a top 6. For those, again, you only get 5 official visits. So the fact that Texas is now getting an official visit shows how much ground the Horns have made up. And he is giving Texas as much of a chance as just about anybody else in his recruitment. Obviously, Tennessee looks really good. Clemson is going to get their shot at him. But the fact that you have Justice Finkley, his former high school teammate on campus, that has just been talking nonstop about how much he loves Texas, along with the fact that when I talked to Hunter, when I think his best offer was Vanderbilt last summer, he always told me, like, hey, if Texas does offer, that's going to be a school that I'm going to heavily consider. I love the campus feel. I like the academics that they have. And, you know, I grew up a big Alabama fan, and Steve Sarkisian and Bo Davis are guys that I remember from their time at Alabama. So overall, I do think that Texas is starting to gain there. And if they were eventually to land Hunter Osborne, it would be one of the more wild Bo Davis recruiting wins, just because this is a guy that had just about every Power 5 offer in the country. You normally don't get away with being 6 months late, but the amount of work he and Steve Sarkisian recruiting as the head coach have done has just been really, really impressive.
Yeah, I think, you know, every time a guy gets, you know, Texas gets in late on an offer like that, it's like, oh boy, here we go. You know, you're kind of wasting your time, but they've been able to, you know, do a lot of really good work in this particular recruitment. And you know, credit to them for that. I think that getting him to campus is a huge component, and like you mentioned, having Finkley along there, the former teammate at Hughes Trustville, is huge as well.
Mike, real quick before we move on to how many per cycle do you think that you get where you offer them very clearly late, but for some reason it just clicks? Maybe one or two, if that.
Man, you're kind of lucky. Maybe I can remember like Herman's final year where they offered everybody late, and everybody made a point to tell them that they offered them late. So, you know,
I'm thinking about schools that aren't Texas. Like, obviously A&M gets away with it a lot, but
Bama, Georgia, those kind of schools can do it. Texas used to be able to do it. Yeah, Texas used to be able to do it. I think it's a condition of winning and
sure,
you know, being a good program and being a program that's looked at like that. So yeah, definitely a big weekend. We also think that, you know, I mean, outside of we should also mention Blake Purchase is going to be on that visit. The Cherry Creek.
That's a sneaky good
edge rusher. I really like his stuff, and you know, he's another one that Texas got in late on, but they were able to immediately get him to schedule a visit. I think he's a top like 150 guy in the top 247. One of the top guys in Colorado, one of the best defenders out west. So a big edge body that Texas can take a swing at that weekend as well.
Yeah, and with Blake Purchase too, Mike, I mean, I know that you kind of know this as well, but for those who don't know, Cherry Creek profiles extremely well to Texas. I had a lot of friends from Texas that went to Cherry Creek. Shout out to my boy, Sam Cole. I know that Gunnar Helm kind of spoke highly of that part of the transition is easy from there. It's almost a little bit like it's almost a little bit like an Austin Westlake-ish type school in the Denver area. So the natural kind of fit is there. Plus, having Gunnar on campus is going to help with Blake a ton, just in the same way that with Hunter Osborne and Justice Finkley's relationship. And I think that that's an important thing that the Texas staff is kind of starting to do. These out-of-state prospect factories like Hewitt-Trustville or Cherry Creek, or there are a couple in New Jersey, there are a couple in Utah that they kind of have been targeting a ton, in Georgia and Florida. When you create those pipelines, it becomes a lot easier to then sell kids. I mean, even when I was talking to Kamarian Franklin, who is a rising junior from the state of Mississippi, he told me that, the fact that Texas has Aaron Bryant, who didn't even go to the same high school, but is just from kind of a similar area in Mississippi, means that Texas is going to get a visit. Because if he and his family chose to go to Texas, well, then there's clearly something there.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to the last weekend, the big weekend. Before we do that, I should say we're going to take a pause here. So that you guys, if you're listening on the podcast, you'll hear a word from our sponsors. If you're watching on YouTube, we'll continue to roll on. All right, the June 24th weekend is going to be a big one. We've got a lot of names listed, probably a lot of names we haven't listed. That'll probably be a weekend where a lot of the commits come in, the guys who are already committed, and then, you know, you'll also have some big targets. I think from a perspective of like position group wise, it's a big offensive line weekend. Ian Reed, Jaden Chapman, Connor Stroh all coming in, Andre Kojo all coming in that weekend. That's something we saw Kyle Flood do a little bit last year, where he would group guys together and say, hey, come in, like, hey, Cole Hudson and Connor Robertson, you're on your visit together. And, you know, guys like that. And so I think that it's been fascinating to watch Flood over time recruit this foursome as a group. It's like when we saw them at junior day, they were all together. They all came on the same spring visits, it felt like. And now all coming on the same official visit. I think it's a pretty unique approach to offensive line recruiting, where it's not piece by piece, but it's, hey, you guys are going to be a cohesive unit on the field, so we're going to recruit you as a cohesive unit. Yeah,
absolutely. And Mike, kind of just a little bit on topic, but in general, obviously, we talked about last week the fact that Odessa Permy and interior offensive lineman Harris Sewell kind of decided to continue his recruiting process without Texas in the mix. This is just my take, and we've talked about it on the podcast before if you want to pull up the receipts. If Texas can grab Jaden Chapman and Ian Reed, I honestly think that that is about as good of a 1-2 punch as you could get in this class. So the fact that they did have that cohesive unit approach really does help with the fact that, you know, Mike, it's just the truth. Harris Sewell wasn't on those trips. Obviously, they were trying to get him out from Odessa. It's a little harder to make the trip, but you don't have now, when you're talking about that recruiting approach, you don't have a missing piece of, okay, well, this guy ended up choosing another school or doesn't like Texas or whatever. No, it's still the same core unit that you're talking about. And I'm going to pick your brain on something as well. There's a couple of really good edges that are going to be there that weekend as well. You reported that Colton Bosick is going to be taking his trip to Texas that time. And
we believe, he has not announced those dates, but looking at kind of what he does have scheduled, I think it lines up for that weekend.
And Braylon Shelby from Friendswood will also be in attendance. So possibly, I believe Darian Gallette's kind of set for that weekend as well. So, I mean, there are a lot of edges.
Anthony Hill.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, that's another 5-star. It's a big weekend for offensive linemen and defenders. Not a huge skill weekend. Looks like they're getting kind of the skill weekends out of the way early. I mean, there will be some guys. Tony Mitchell is scheduled for that weekend, the cornerback out of Alabama. I'm really interested to see by the time we get to the end of June if he still makes that trip, either because I just don't think Texas feels there's enough interest on that end to spend a trip on him.
No, but I do believe that they have another couple of safeties set for that weekend, or at least loosely with, I think, Makari Vickers and Jaden Bonsu are 2 out-of-state guys that are kind of tentatively scheduled to visit that weekend. So even if Tony Mitchell, and I think I'm with you, by the way. I think that we've talked about this off the air as well. But Texas fans, I would not really get your hopes up with that.
Yeah.
If they get them on campus, great. You never know what's going to happen. But I think that prioritizing other options at safety makes a ton of sense. But more than anything, I'm just excited with the amount of talent that's on campus that weekend. And then once we start to hear the potential, okay, well, they think that they might have locked up Shelby, or okay, they're in the best spot for Gillette, or they made a big move with Colton Bosick. Those are the type of reports and stuff that we get that just make the June visit season really fun. Yeah, it's unpredictable. Yeah, some crystal balls will be missed from across the industry, but it's what makes college football recruiting so much fun. And that's when you get into the really fun. The first thing I'm doing at 7 a.m. is opening Horns 24/7, and I'm going to scroll it until I fall asleep because there's just wall-to-wall updates.
Yeah, and it's been a slow couple weeks, just from a recruiting perspective. Feels like everybody's kind of winding up for this. And, we've been able to try to go to some things. We'll be at some stuff this weekend, but this is like kind of when it really starts. These are the three probably most anxiety-inducing weekends for me to write the Stampede, because it's just like, as soon as visits kind of end on Sunday, it's a race to like get enough information. Is that Cherry?
Yeah, that's Cherry in the mix. She would not stop meowing at the door, so apologies.
It's a race to get enough information to fill the Stampede to hit our 8 a.m. deadline. And every Sunday on those visit weekends, Hudson, you haven't worked with me for an official visit weekend yet, but like my personal policy is we don't bother kids while they're on their visit. I'm not checking in with kids throughout the entire thing. You know what I mean? So a lot of it's calling afterwards, which is tough because a lot of times those kids are getting on flights or they're getting, they're on the way home. And so it's tough to get everything. We made it work last year. So, we'll certainly make it work again. I talked off the top about, just kids moving timelines and surprising decisions. We had definitely had one this week. It wasn't surprising from a destination standpoint, but more from a timeline standpoint. DeAndre Moore, the wide receiver from Los Alamitos, announced his commitment to Louisville. Louisville bagging some big name recruits this year, bagging some big name recruits this year. I think with Moore, so I talked about this a lot when I saw him in the spring. I thought the two top teams were Texas and Louisville. And he had talked pretty openly about that. He's close with Pierce Clarkson, who's committed to Louisville. Obviously, they're doing a lot of things on the NIL side. And I think the surprise for me was the timeline because
not going into the season.
Yeah, there was a lot of confidence in landing DeAndre Moore at Texas. And I think talking to DeAndre, I definitely got that feeling. He was really, last time I talked to him, he was really talking up his official visit, was super excited. And just to do it really before taking those trips during the summer really surprised me. But, he went out to the quarterback retreat, which is put on by Pierce Clarkson's father, Steve Clarkson, and spent some time out there with them and came out of that weekend committed. So seemingly a big name off the board at wide receiver for Texas, and a guy they thought they had a really good chance at. I think there was a lot of shock around the country in a lot of offices when it came to that one.
For sure. And also, I think something important to mention too, Mike, this is just my personal opinion. Maybe you disagree. I think it would be a lot bigger of a deal if Texas didn't already have Ryan Niblett in the boat. Like the fact that they have him just makes it to where, okay, DeAndre Moore's off the board. Let's just keep chugging with the guys that we have at wide receiver because, I mean, you still do have a possibility of landing guys like Jaquez Petaway, Jonah Wilson, Jonte Cook. Like there's a lot of options for Texas to where you're not too upset because you do have a very high floor with Ryan Niblett, who I believe is like the number 52 player in the country, according to 24/7. So
yeah, absolutely. Hudson, anything else you want to add before we get out of here?
I have a kind of semi-hypothetical to throw your way.
Okay, fire away.
What do you think would be bigger for Texas recruiting as far as a potential Arch Manning timeline? Do you think that if he left the visit weekend, went to the Manning Passing Academy, and they had a big deal about it, and it's going the same time as a Texas official visit, or what if? And this is, of course, a big if. We don't even know that he's going to decide during the summer. He could take it into the fall. But what if he decided to pop while on campus or a day or two following? And so then leading into the big official visit weekend, you had the wave of an Arch Manning commitment.
I mean, I think you would take it the sooner you could get it. I think that's how you'd want it. Now, I just don't think that's going to happen. I just don't envision a scenario where that happens. But who knows? I mean, I have no clue how it's going to happen. That's like the craziest thing is I don't even know what to watch for. Is Arch going to make his first tweet his commitment tweet? And would it be on brand for Arch to make that his
notifications are on, Texas fans? Don't you worry. Mike and I have that Twitter account. Borderline, a bomb's going off if we'll know about it. So I don't know. I just think that that's one of the more interesting things is that you have Mike, probably one of, if not the highest profile recruits in a while. And nobody has any idea how he's going to release his commitment. Like the normal rules do not apply.
Yeah, I think, like I said, I don't even know what to really look for other than I'm going to watch that account. or maybe maybe something comes out of the Manning passing camp where they say, hey, we're going to go to some sort of live stream or something.
Yeah.
Or maybe nothing. Maybe
Yeah.
he just commits.
Maybe he commits, and then you have to hear from a source like, yo, Arch, like, you've got to trust me, Arch.
And it leaks out somewhere. Yeah, it's going to be weird.
It would be really funny if it was a true old school, like old type recruiting. Sorry for the ricochet, Mike, but like talking when you were in high school, where it's just like, yeah, the newspaper found out, and it's like, oh,
yeah, the old times back in 2003,
back in 2003 and 2004. Apologies to all the listeners as well. Just a little joke. I mean, shoot, when I was in high school, the way that people committed even feels old now. Like there were times, I'm sure you remember this too, where like reporters would break commitments. Like,
yeah,
like, oh yeah, no, it's fine, whatever. Yeah, I'm committed.
Before social media, that's how it happened. Before kids had an outlet to do their own thing,
which is great, and you build brands and everything. Like it genuinely is a net good. But now, if a reporter broke a commitment, it's like, why aren't you giving that kid his moment? What, like, and you almost saw it a little bit with the Marius Mims thing, to where there's almost a distrust. And okay, well then why hasn't he said it if he is committed?
Right. And there have been kids who have chosen to go through, a reporter, and it's very rare. In fact, I've broken one of those. I broke DeAndre Sweat's commitment. And it was legitimately like, I was looking at his Twitter one day, and he had just put University of Texas commit in his bio. Never tweeted anything, never anything.
Oh, those are the best. More recruits like that, and you'll become cult favorites. Also, Mike, just real quick plug. T'Vondre Sweat, we've got 93 days until kickoff. So
there you go. So I texted him and I said, T'Vondre, did you commit to Texas? He said, yeah, like 2 days ago. And I was like, okay, can I report that? And he was like, sure, do whatever you want. So it was the one time I wrote breaking without with it being breaking. I have a thing of like, if I didn't break it, I don't write breaking. It's a pet peeve of mine. But,
yeah, a little bit, yeah.
But anywho, big time. That's like the only time. And so, yeah, it just doesn't happen quite that frequently. But going back to your original question, no, I think you want I think if you could get it going into the big weekend, you definitely want that.
Yeah. I don't know. And again, just a hypothetical to throw out there, because it's kind of the biggest question, I think, remaining on the board. Obviously, who he picks will be up there, but with Texas kind of looking good and a lot of uncertainty, it's pretty freaking interesting. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll kind of see. And I think, what's interesting is if you talk to kids, a lot of kids think Arch is going to Texas anyways. Maybe it's just, I don't know that that's like a huge piece of intel, or if it's just kids being kids. But like, so I think almost they expect it at this point. But, I still think the hype of it all would be big. I should also say there's going to be some 24s visiting throughout the month, 25s. It's camp season, so like there'll be guys coming down to camp quite often. There's a lot going on. And we'll try to have you covered as best we can. All right, Hudson, anything else to add before we get out of here?
I don't think so.
All right. Well, we appreciate you guys for listening. We glad we were able to get you 2 pieces of content this week from the state of recruiting. And we want to thank our producer, Taylor Estes, for sitting with us for hours on end while we record these things. For Hudson Standish, I'm Mike Roach, and we'll see you guys next week.